Everyone knows what the Force is, right? Or do they? The Force is one of the most important, yet one of the vaguest elements in all of Star Wars. In this video, we're going to explain what precious little we know about it, as well as expand upon it for the purposes of our story in Episode 10 and beyond.
The Force?
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
What Obi-Wan says is true, from a certain point of view. However, he is speaking about the different aspects of the Force, which are important to differentiate between. The Force is this grand power that binds everything together, seen as a metaphor for God. The living Force, which is what George Lucas had once referred to as the personal Force, resides in all living things. So technically, one could say that everyone has the Force in them. This is true from an in-world scientific perspective, because all living things have midichlorians. In Star Wars, midichlorians are microscopic life forms that reside within the cells of all living things. Midichlorians are inspired by real-life mitochondria, organelles that reside within our bodies and provide energy to our cells. Rather than powering cells like mitochondria do, midichlorians are the physical manifestation of the Force in all living organisms, and they act as receptors that allow for interaction between the living Force and the cosmic Force. When the physical form ceases to exist, the life energy of all beings is thrust back into the cosmic Force at death, which forms a never-ending cycle. But let's get a little more specific about these two aspects of the Force, shall we?
Living beings generate the living Force, which in turn powers the wellspring that is the cosmic Force. All energy from the living Force, from all things that have ever lived, feeds into the cosmic Force, binding everything and communicating to us through the midichlorians.
First, the cosmic Force. George Lucas has described the cosmic Force as a sort of heaven in this fictional universe. It is directly connected to the will of the Force, which is a phrase that is thrown around an awful lot in Star Wars. The beings who reside within the living Force are within it only temporarily. At the time of death, a being's life energy passes on and rejoins with the cosmic Force. In very special cases, however, this is not necessarily the end of that being. There have been a few who have managed to maintain their consciousness within the cosmic Force by completely letting go of everything at the time of their death. This involves releasing all attachments, feelings, fears, etc., etc. In doing this, these beings are able to fall into perfect unity with the Force and become what we know to be Force ghosts. This secret was taught to Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn by the Force priestesses, 5 beings who lived on the wellspring of life as shown in the 12th episode of the 6th season of the Clone Wars. It has been speculated by Dave Filoni himself that these priestesses were once a singular ancient being who discovered the secret to eternal life within the Force. In order for mortals to comprehend her, she appears as 5 distinct forms. It was through these mysterious beings, or being, that the secret to becoming a Force ghost was learned. At the time of his death, Qui-Gon Jinn's training in the ability of transcending death and becoming one with the cosmic Force was incomplete. His training was to a degree that he was able to keep his consciousness intact, but initially only able to commune with living beings in places that were particularly strong with the Force, such as Mortis or Dagobah. He then managed to reach out to Yoda, though still unable to take any physical form. Gradually within the cosmic Force, Qui-Gon Jinn was able to complete his training and was eventually able to take physical form to speak to his former Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, to whom he taught the secret of becoming a Force ghost too. However, not every Jedi who dies can learn to become a Force ghost unless they have the specific training. At the time of their death, they simply pass on into the embrace of the cosmic Force, just as everyone and everything else does. Force ghosts are associated with great wisdom and clairvoyance and serve as wise counsel to the living, but they're not infallible and are more than capable of being wrong. Just before his final battle with Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan and Yoda both encouraged Luke to strike his father down, believing that the Sith Lord was too far gone to ever be turned back to the light. Luke would go on to prove them very wrong, as Darth Vader would be the one to cast down his master, Emperor Palpatine, and bring balance to the Force at last. And now, the Living Force.
When a living thing dies, all is renewed. Life passes from the living force into the cosmic force and becomes one with it.
The living force is the fabric of all life. It's derived from the concept of a life force from very primitive religions in our own human history. The living force can be wielded as a weapon to be used for good or evil, but it inherently does not have a light side or a dark side. It is the wielder of the force that makes the choice to be good or evil. But how do force-sensitive beings tap into that power? Well, as the living force and cosmic force interact with each other, a certain manipulation can be achieved by those living organisms that possess more attunement with the force itself. This is done through midichlorians. Though all living things have midichlorians, only a fraction of them are able to use the force in the way that Jedi, Sith, and other force sensitives do. This is all due to the amount of midichlorians a being has. Those rare beings who possess an exceptionally high number of midichlorians are able to interpret the will of the Force, as well as exert control over it through various Force powers. This creates a clear-cut methodology by which Force control, or talent, is measured. It is very much a spectrum. Anakin had the highest midichlorian count at well over 20,000 units, which made him extremely powerful with the Force. Obi-Wan, while having more than enough midichlorians to wield the Force, did not have an exceptionally high number. Someone like Chirrut Imwe from Rogue One did not have enough midichlorians to wield active Force abilities like Force Push or Force Pull, but he was much more Force-attuned than the average being due to his deep spiritual connection with the Force, which allowed him to exhibit impressive abilities despite being completely blind. From this point on, for the most part, we will be crafting explanations and limitations that will serve to define how we use the Force within our story. We must first begin with Anakin Skywalker. As you might have noticed at the end of Return of the Jedi, Anakin becomes a Force ghost despite possessing zero training in the ability. Having been immersed in the dark side until minutes before his death, there was no way for him to learn this power until it was far too late. So, how did this happen? Well, we believe that at the moment of his death, the Force rewarded Anakin for fulfilling his destiny. He turned away from the dark and returned to the light by saving his son in a purely selfless act. By allowing Anakin to retain his sense of self upon his death, the Force granted him the ability to interact with his children and others who would require his guidance. The cosmic Force has a will and has exhibited the agency to do things like this before. For those of you who have seen Rebels, the Force rewarded former Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus for his sacrifice by restoring his damaged eyesight so that he could see Hera Syndulla, the woman he loved, one final time before he died. So, it would make complete sense that the Force would grant the Chosen One such a boon. It is important to note that in canon, Sith cannot become Force ghosts. The Sith are selfish and seek immortality. They are never able to truly let go of everything, which is required to become entirely one with the Force. They can maintain themselves after death, but it is in a cheap imitation of a Force ghost. Sith can tear their spirits from their bodies through essence transfer, and they can also tether themselves to places or objects, such as Marka Ragnos, Exar Kun, and Darth Momin did. These spirits are not Force ghosts, but are rather Force shades. They do not reside within the cosmic Force. This may have been what we saw Darth Bane appear as in the Clone Wars, when Yoda encounters him during his quest to learn the secrets of becoming a Force ghost. Though it is plausible that Bane was simply an illusion formed by the Force priestesses to test Yoda. Next, we will address the special phenomena known as a Force dyad. What exactly is a Force dyad? How does it manifest in sentient beings? First, as we previously stated, the Force has a will of its own. It constantly pushes and pulls at the universe, creating divergences in what would be the norm, like with Anakin Skywalker and Kanan Jarrus. If the balance between the dark and light sides of the Force falls off course, it will attempt to correct itself. One such event was the creation of Anakin Skywalker himself, the Chosen One. In Ben Solo, the Skywalker heir, the Force foresaw the depth of his fall when he was just 10 years old, and it answered it by creating Rey in an effort to rebalance the Force. This forever intertwined these two souls in the Force, causing a Force dyad. As director J.J. Abrams describes them, they are soulmates in the Force. But how does a Force dyad manifest within the living Force? Dyads have special Force abilities that grant them the access to manipulate the Force in a way that no other Force-sensitive could. Here, we will attempt to better define the powers that clearly belong to a Force dyad and how they differ from other Force powers. Let's start with the abilities you have seen in the movies themselves. One such power is a dyad Force mirror, which is the ability to mirror the Force power of your dyad with little to no training. This was evident when Ben Solo was immediately able to use Force Heal on Rey, after she had done the same for him only hours before in The Rise of Skywalker. This dyad power allows for a rapid flow of knowledge in the Force between the pair. It is almost like whatever one half of the dyad has already learned, the other could immediately acquire that knowledge through dyad Force Mirror. We believe this power is what unlocked Rey's Force abilities to the extent of proficiency that we saw in The Force Awakens. As Ben, then deep into his Kylo Ren persona, tried to use Mind Probe on Rey, dyad Force Mirror was unknowingly evoked between them. She then siphoned a lot of his knowledge to use it against him. The most commonly seen dyad power in The Last Jedi is known as a dyad Force Bond. Similar to the known power of a Force Bond, usually established between master and apprentice, a dyad Force Bond crosses far, far greater distances. It is also passive. A traditional Force Bond must be activated by either the master or the apprentice, and can be severed to be re-established with another Force sensitive. A dyad Force Bond is always on, and it is irrevocable, with each side having to work to shut the other out continuously. When Rey shuts the door of the Falcon on Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, she effectively shuts off their dyad Force Bond. And for over a year, she consistently had to work at keeping it shut off. It was very hard for her to continue to do so, especially when she was thrust into the festivities of Pasaana. It created the opportunity for Kylo Ren to find her. The ability to pass objects back and forth through the Force is unique to a Force dyad. This is called dyad Force transfer. In The Rise of Skywalker, we saw Rey transfer the Skywalker Legacy lightsaber through the Force over to her dyad. This is done by folding time and space between 2 points, in a similar way that a hyperspace warp engine allows for fast travel between 2 planets. This grants a Force dyad the ability to transfer objects across distant spaces. The window connecting these 2 points is extremely short, which confines its use in a more realistic way. The concept of a Force dyad is not new, contrary to popular belief. While the origins of this phenomena have not been revealed, it is easy for us to speculate because we have seen the commonalities that were presented in the sequel trilogy with other characters that are perhaps even more beloved: Darth Revan and Bastila Shan. Revan was a Jedi Knight of the Old Republic that fell to the dark, became a Sith Lord, and then returned to the light, a very similar path to that of our main protagonist, Ben Solo. Bastila Shan was a powerful Jedi Knight that had many unique abilities that were extremely useful in combat. None of her fellow Jedi were ever able to learn these powers, and it was a mystery as to how she came to acquire them. The two would meet and come to realize that they were able to tap into rare, exclusive powers that other Jedi did not have access to. This is essentially the same as a Force dyad. So while the name may have been conceived by J.J. Abrams in The Rise of Skywalker, the presence of a dyad in the Force has long existed in the lore of Star Wars. In our story, we will introduce additional Force dyad powers, such as dyad Force Amplify and dyad Battle Meditation, and many more, as we expand what a Force dyad can do. Lastly, after watching the sequels or reading the novel by Adam Christopher, Shadow of the Sith, one might conclude that Force ghosts are all-powerful. We've witnessed them directly interacting with physical objects such as lightsabers and starfighters, calling down lightning out of the sky, and fighting off force shades to defend their loved ones. But their power must be tempered. Yes, they possess the capacity to perform these great feats, but it will come at a cost in our story. It is not easy for Force ghosts to hold themselves together or to appear in physical form. It is even more taxing for them to command the weather or fight. This give and take is very simple. The greater the action, the more cosmic energy the Force ghosts must consume. Once they've run out, they're no longer able to hold themselves together in physical form. This limitation functions like a battery of sorts, where once tapped out, it must be recharged. Because otherwise, what would be preventing them from defeating every insidious threat that stood against the light? As we said earlier, the Force is one of the most ambiguous elements in all of Star Wars, and while we intend to keep it shrouded in mystery, these are the self-imposed limitations we've orchestrated for the purposes of our story. It may not be perfect, but it is the sandbox of the story we're interested in telling. It is important for us to create realistic limitations for these seemingly all-powerful Force ghosts, and how the Force works as we move forward in our trilogy of films and more.